Let's get into a spoiler-free movie review now, talking about A Haunting in Venice. It's part of a franchise that has had some odd success, even though really, I've only liked one of the films so far. So it's a part of the franchise that includes Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, and now we have A Haunting in Venice. It's supposed to be the spooky one now that we're getting into spooky season at the movies. They wanted to cash in on what if we do the same kind of murder mystery, but now with a bit of a supernatural horror-esque. It's really like diet horror. Ooh, not even close to that. It's like horror adjacent because you have Kenneth Branagh, who also directs and stars in these movies. He plays the detective, who is the same detective throughout all of the films. This story takes place in 1947. He is retired. He is done being a detective, but somebody pulls him back in. You have Tina Fey's character, who is trying to write a new book after having 3 failed books. She heard this story about a woman whose daughter died from suicide, and they want to go check it out and get the details, so they go to a seance where they try to communicate with the daughter who passed away, and then everything hits the fan, and then everything gets scary because they are in this building that is supposedly haunted by children who want to kill again. Now, I enjoyed Death on the Nile because I went into it with very low expectations. On the surface level of these movies, there really isn't anything spectacular, nothing to really write home about, but they are pretty entertaining. What's different about these movies, and the reason you could keep making these with a revolving cast of characters, is because you don't go to this movie for the A-list star. The format of this movie is the star. It's the whodunit scenario. Same formula as the 2 previous movies. He goes, somebody dies, he has to figure out how that person dies, and then goes through all this investigation of asking all these people different questions, finding out where they were, just like you would in the game of Clue. So this is kind of reintroducing what they already did with these movies back in the day to a whole new generation, and I think it works. But I think it's really for people who are so into murder dramas and investigations. This movie is kind of like NCIS because the action isn't really hardcore. The horror, it really isn't scary whatsoever. There are some jump scare moments because really loud noises come out of nowhere. So that will get you. But as far as creepy visuals or any blood and death, it's very PG-13. So you wouldn't have any worry of going to see this movie and having nightmares afterwards unless you just really don't do well whatsoever with any horror elements. But I feel like an 8-year-old could watch this movie and have no problem falling asleep at night. I went into this movie differently than I did Death on the Nile. Death on the Nile, I had really low expectations and ended up enjoying it pretty well. This one, since I liked that one, I had a little bit higher expectations because I knew what the format was going to be. I just knew that it was going to be naturally engaging because you're trying to figure it out just like the detective is in this movie, and there's some fun element to that. It becomes a game to try and figure it out and put all the pieces together. But I have to say in this one, really lacked creativity, really lacked a lot of imagination. It was so focused on making it scary and never really got there that it took away from the plot developing and making you question different things going on in the movie. And at times, it just felt really boring. That I'm always invested in a movie like this because I want to figure out who did it and I want to be right. That is it. I watch these movies and I want to have it right within the first 20 minutes because that is just how I am. I feel like this was the most predictable out of all these movies because they were so focused on making it scary. They've left out making it engaging and making it entertaining. So I really struggled just to want to pay attention and want to see the result of this movie because it was just lackluster. And the other problem with the format of the movie being the star is it's really hard for any of the actors to shine because I feel like they are so restricted that nobody really gets a chance to shine and show off what great of an actor they are because you have Michelle Yeoh in this, who is probably the most standout performance, but then you have Tina Fey, who I was excited to see, and her performance really wasn't great whatsoever, but I think it was because she was trying to play this character in 1947, but the entire time period felt off, so her entire character, I felt, was a little bit wasted. And then you have Kenneth Branagh, who is starring in this movie and also directing it. And I have to say, it really shows in this movie because there's not a whole lot of great direction with all the cast. And there's also not a really great performance from him, which he is so good in all the other movies. And I couldn't help but compare it to Knives Out and Knives Out Glass Onion because Daniel Craig does a great job at playing such a great lead in that I feel like the star of that movie is him, and it's not just the format of that because I would just watch it for his character, the way he talks, the way he figures things out, and the way his mind works. In this movie, Kenneth Branagh really didn't do that whatsoever. So I would say after the first 20, maybe 25 minutes of this movie, it really started to go downhill. It did start out with a little bit of promise with Michelle Yeoh's character organizing the seance and some of the things that happened early on in the film, but everything throughout never really got back there. The entire movie just had a really weird tone and even a lack of music because there were scenes they were trying to let breathe and let you live in that creepiness of the house, but it was just silent to the point where it was boring. I needed a score there. I needed some music. I needed some more things happening in this movie to make me want to get to the finale. Surprisingly, this movie is doing pretty well given that it had a $60 million budget. We went to see this on a Friday night and it was surprisingly packed. Primarily an older audience, which again goes back to me thinking that people who love NCIS also love movies like this. And I don't want to hate anybody for enjoying this movie. I think the format of it is fine. This one just didn't really win me over. But I could see them definitely making a fourth movie. And they've even said if Kenneth Branagh is down to do another one, if there's another story to be told, there will be a fourth installment inside of this franchise. I hope they get away completely from making anything creepy and go back to something like Death on the Nile, where there's more that goes on in the location, because I think that's really what ended up hurting this movie in the end, because Death on the Nile, they're on the boat, but they also had several stops along the way for more things to happen. This one just felt so boring. It felt like a bottle episode from TV where they didn't want to spend a whole lot on a lot of different locations. They just stay in this place the entire time, and it just feels kind of boring and empty and shallow. So at the moment of recording this, the movie has made $71 million worldwide. It may continue to rise going into October and people wanting to watch something somewhat scary or creepy at least. So I would say go to see this movie if you just love murder whodunit movies, or if you have somebody in your life who doesn't like scary movies whatsoever, and you just kind of want to wade them into those waters of maybe possibly getting to take them to see The Exorcist later on. I don't really think there's anything worth it in this movie to have to see it in theaters. Definitely wait for it to come on to streaming services because I think it's worthy of a stream, especially if you haven't seen all the other movies inside of the franchise. Maybe just knock them out in a weekend. Otherwise, you can definitely wait for this one. So for A Haunting in Venice, I wanted to give it like a 3. My expectations were not met whatsoever. So I am going to give it 2 out of 5 seances.